I'm delighted to be the director for OneKind, and it's a privilege to be able to talk to you today. One thing I don't like about this is I can't see you. I can't see the people I'm actually talking to. I can't see the reactions, and it's quite odd. But thank you very much for spending time listening to me this morning. So I want to talk to you about compassion in conservation. And as Kirsty mentioned, my background is that I came from conservation sector. I was trained as a ranger, etc. And I've always admired and wanted to work for something like and be in charge of something like Advocates for Animals, as we used to be called, but now we're called OneKind. But prior to that, we were the Scottish Society for the Prevention of Vivisection. And I always quite like to start any talks I give with pictures of our founders who in Edinburgh decided that more should be done, or something should be done regarding pets being stolen to order for the vivisection industry and science. So thank you to the Ivory Sisters for making sure that we started well and we continue right through this pandemic. And again, thank you to all our supporters for being so generous and helpful during a really difficult year, where we've all really struggled to adapt to the challenges of the pandemic. And just for my own amusement, I absolutely love this picture. This is one of the ways that we would have, now I'm talking to you on Zoom, but previously people would have driven around in vehicles and advertised the society. And this is absolutely cracking vehicle with one of the mascots of the organization, Mac the dog there, to further the aims of the society. And yeah, we've come quite a long way regarding technology, I think. Well, I hope, as long as it doesn't drop out on me halfway through this presentation. Kirsty mentioned that obviously we've got our manifesto live now, which is aimed firmly towards the Scottish Parliament and the upcoming elections. And we are very keen that future MSPs do more for Scotland's animals in the next period. Scotland should be leading in its standards regarding animal welfare and how we think about animals. And our manifesto, shown on the screen here, shows that OneKind is busy, and we are, we've got lots of policies and implementation campaigns regarding wild animals, farmed animals, again, lab animals, and increasingly talking about the problems of salmon farming and fish welfare. So quite a lot to do, and obviously we can't do it on our own, and that's where we need help. But I mentioned that it's been a challenging year, and from a personal point of view, I've been incredibly lucky because I live in Glasgow, and I can get out of Glasgow into the surrounding countryside. So that's it's very urban in places, and then feeling a little bit more rural in other places on my route. And I have my own patch now that I almost sort of jealously guard and go on about. And I've done a couple of videos before about the animals I see in that. So it's very important to me, and it's very important to other people, and I'm sure it's important to you, to be able to get out and have some refreshment in nature. And this area that OneKind's been working on for a long time now, which is wild animal welfare, really matters to me because of my previous history and my career, but also my current job. But just going out into the wee green place and looking at Glasgow's wildlife has given me that sort of therapy, being able to see kingfishers on the River Kelvin that flows right through the city, herons by the weir in the mornings, frogs in the garden pond, whatever it might be in the meadows, orchids, and whatever it might be has really made it a better year for me, shall we say. And one morning at 6:30 in the morning, I was absolutely incredulous to be able to see some otters on the River Kelvin. And this is a short video I took of a mother playing tug of war with a well-grown cub of a large eel. And for me, I mean, I was absolutely made up by this. And as you can imagine, it's like winning the pools to see this in my urban area. But for me, it really made me think about what we can do to be able to bring these types of animals back again, or create the habitats that they need. Because formerly, this area was heavy industry. There's a dye works just close to this location where people can still remember the results of that dye manufacture were actually thrown into the river on a Friday night. That's what you did to dispose of it. So the River Kelvin was not a nice place to be. There was it was heavily polluted, and children were definitely deterred from going anywhere near it. But now, otters, kingfishers, herons, the top predators of the food chain, all in there, and the river's recovering. Yes, still lots of challenges. I think you can see a piece of litter dangling off the flood debris there, but really good to see and really heartening. And remember, otters used to be hunted by packs of hounds. Once upon a time, otter hounds would have hunted otters in days gone by. Can't escape the welfare issues. People care about animals. People really do. And this is a swan with a little bump in its head that I spotted one morning. And by the time we managed to get the SPCA out, it came out really quickly. The bird had it gathered quite a lot of people watching this bird and worrying about it and wondering what to do. So SPCA managed to take it to captivity, and then it was nurtured back to health again, and then re-released back on the canal. And by that time, the female had managed to incubate, and one chick survived from that, and the male took over his duties when he got back. But again, heartening to see this, and the way that people connected with this bird, but also felt a part of their local area, and were involved in the care of it, even though they weren't directly, the SPCA did so. But there was this real direct connection, this real passion for things on the doorstep, and people were allowed to be able to be involved, and I think that was really, really good. A little bit more serious, my day job in the Rspb was to manage a team of people who are, quite frankly, heroes of the animal welfare world, in my opinion, even though they may not think of it that way. Rspb is a conservation organisation, so I was the head of investigations, and that's to deal with wildlife crime. So it's to do with criminality, really to do killing of birds, especially protected birds like birds of prey, but also to try and further investigations against people who were intent on stealing birds' eggs from the wild, and also killing other species or disturbing them. So it was a big job, and I did that for quite a long time. That work continues, and every now and again you'll see the results of the Rspb investigation team popping up in the media. And it's extremely, extremely challenging to try and find out what's going on in the wider countryside, miles from anywhere else. And one of the reasons that I moved into a sort of city area was to be away from some of the challenges that I'd have to face during my day job. So in the garden here, I can enjoy life without worrying about birds of prey being poisoned or other things happening. So we deal with some, and they still do deal with some really brutal cases, and people killing birds by using traps, poisoning. Here's slightly more hair in this photograph. Poisoning of golden eagles. This is a really serious case we had, where 3 adult or sub-adult golden eagles were poisoned, and led to a major case. And my colleagues and myself feel that some of these cases did lead to real change in either legislation or now where we're looking at the licensing of driven grouse shooting. And yeah, some serious work here. all through that time, I would think a lot about the comparisons between the wildlife that I would see in my spare time. So the west coast of Scotland, go and see otters, maybe guiding groups, which I do in my spare time sometimes, and contrast that with the day job, which is the, you know, trying to catch people who are doing illegal things. Now, bang up to date, I can use that experience of working for very, very large conservation organizations and actually think back about how I used to think about things and how I think about things now. So previously with the Rspb, I would have to only deal with wildlife crime. So it wasn't to do with welfare, animal welfare as such. There was definitely elements about animal welfare within the work I was doing, but it wasn't really, you know, the animal welfare decisions were being made probably somewhere else, and advice was being sought regarding various things. And one of the things I really like now is these 7 principles for ethical wildlife control. And when we say control, I mean probably killing or moving animals around. And now I think back, actually, a lot of the times when I was very senior in the Rspb, looking after other teams of people who were dealing with farmland conservation or whatever else, we actually went through a lot of these stages. So when you're thinking about doing something on, say, a nature reserve, you need to think about what can you do differently before you kill an animal, or you have to make some sort of intervention. And you have to justify things with evidence. So you have to say, well, this species is being affected by this one, and therefore we need a plan of action about how we're going to address that. And you need to ensure objectives are clear and achievable objectives. And fundamentally, you've got to prioritize animal welfare in that process. But if you look at number five here, which I really like as well, is maintaining social acceptability. So community values, you and me and everybody else. We need to use scientific information to inform practical programs of work that are going to happen. So I would sit there, I was on the chairing a reserves management board. We would look at various areas of land that were under control of whichever organization was working for, and then you would evaluate the things that needed to happen. A bit of maybe vegetation cutting here, some tree planting there, shooting foxes somewhere else. So there was a whole range of actions that have to happen. And I don't think necessarily we plugged in enough the animal welfare side of things, making those decisions. We would accept that things were legal, you're doing things legally, but it was very difficult sometimes to actually link that in with the management planning process. So I really like these 7 principles. And as you can imagine, OneKind don't shut up about them. They were developed by Dubois et al. In 2017. And it's just such a good ready reckoner for anybody that's thinking about any sort of intervention regarding a wild animal. And I wanted to sort of illustrate to you the sort of contrasts as I go along through this talk of how that is or isn't thought about in our countryside today. So this is a bit of an icon of the uplands, the red grouse. Fantastic bird in its own right. We often forget about that when we talk about driven grouse shooting. We have some issues in our uplands, and this is a whole new area of countryside. This is not nature reserves. This is large heather moorland managed by gamekeepers and owned by a relatively few landowners. And obviously the objective here is to create as many grouse as possible to shoot them for fun. So heather burning, using medicated grit to increase the health of the birds, control or killing of predators on the ground. So going back to our 7 principles, I'm not really sure much of this is being considered as part of this land management. There seems to be everlasting amounts of predator control or killing on these sorts of areas, as opposed to a defined scientific, rational basis for doing so. And I used to deal with them all the time. Grouse moors were one of the main areas for wildlife crime incidents, such as this is a golden eagle that's been dumped in a lay-by, and it was trapped by its legs in a spring trap, and then eventually died of its injuries. It's got a satellite tag on the back there. We'll talk about that a bit later. Leads to grouse moors and uplands over the years has led to a lot of media and a lot of awareness raising. And that really happened because of online forums and blogs such as Raptor Persecution Scotland blog, Mark Avery's blog, Chris Packham's work on driven grouse shooting and the issues to do with it. And here I am at my Rspb time. I'm talking about grouse moor management to Charlotte. I think we're doing a piece for Countryfile in this particular situation. So lots of awareness raising. There is more public engagement. And number 5 on those principles I mentioned, the maintain social acceptability. There's not a lot of social acceptability of this issue right now. I think awareness is growing that grouse moors, their days are numbered as a countryside management thing that we're going to put up with socially in the UK. Coming back home just for 1 second, just to make a point that here's a rather, I was quite pleased with this, a little quick clip of 2 foxes in the garden just under the bird table. And the only thing they've got to contend with in the garden here is having their tails pulled by magpies, which you'll see in a minute. But the main cause of death of foxes in urban areas is being run over. It's not shortage of food. It's not shortage of denning sites. It's not necessarily being disturbed. It's the main cause of death is being run over when they're young. So here's the foxes under the bird table. And I was amazed at this behavior where a magpie sneaks up behind it and basically pulls at his tail, doesn't like it being in the area. Magpie probably had a nest somewhere close by. So all is good. And I used to, again, compare and contrast. I would drive up from home. We maybe be doing some field work in Scotland. And then from a day job point of view, be thinking about these things, which are snares. So I am absolutely incredulous that snares are still legal in Scotland, the rest of the UK. And we haven't actually banned the dratted things at this point in time. Now, there's been a lot of work done by some really great people to raise the issues of snares over the years, including my own organisation. And there's been various initiatives and additions to the legislation that have meant that there's various requirements for the use of snares, and we've tightened up a lot on the use of snares in Scotland. So they have to be tagged, you have to have a stop, you have to check them 24 hours, you have to be trained in the use. There's quite a lot of intervention there to enable them to be used in the countryside. One thing that does drive me absolutely crazy is we keep talking about the statistics that will come out all the time is about how many people are using snares illegally. And yes, the numbers of people using snares illegally has gone down, but they're still being used. They're still there. It's still a wire loop. Sometimes when you're dealing with particularly campaigning work and policy work, there's nowhere else to go apart from you've got to ban them. You can't make this any less inhumane. You can't make it any better than it is. It's a wire noose that closes around an animal, and it's held there until somebody comes along and kills it. And here we go. This is the contrast between the garden fox and probably the countryside fox, particularly in areas just around grouse moors or the lower ground and grouse moor areas, snares being used. This is a fox in a snare, and they also catch other animals. So we know that, and I hate this term, but non-target species such as badgers and people's domestic pets are caught in snares every single year. And we know that because we run a website that tries to raise awareness and for people to report in their snares. And really, whether it's illegal, legal, it doesn't really matter. People report it. Any illegal snares get reported to police immediately. But here's a badger snare. Yeah, so we want a snare-free Scotland. There is a review of snaring coming up very soon. And again, we'll be relying on your help to get involved with that. And we do want to see this ending, and I want every MSP to pledge to that if we could possibly get it. You know, come on. It's the right thing to do, and we need to do it. The suffering from these objects is just horrific. And what's even worse, the victims from snares and shooting of other animals that aren't wanted, particularly with grouse moors, are placed in middens or pits or stink pits. And this really is only to attract other animals to be killed as well. So the cycle of killing just goes on and on and on. And going back to our 7 principles of ethical wildlife control, does anybody think this goes anywhere near any of that? There's, you know, what evidence is there that this sheer amount of killing actually does whatever the gamekeeper thinks it's going to do, which is, you know, stop their grouse or pheasants being killed? What are the objectives? Are they clear and achievable? Are they prioritizing animal? I think no to all of those is probably the answer. Yeah, so Snare Watch, we run the website, we've done a little revamp. We've produced a quick report from that, some of the results from that quite recently. Always get quite a lot of interest from the media regarding snares when it comes up again, but we just can't seem to get that final traction to get them banned. But you know, as I say, we've got another window of opportunity coming up this year to get snares out there and get them discussed once more. So, Kirsty was helping me with the technology earlier, and apparently there's a polling system, so we can do all sorts of polls. So, popping up on your screen now, there should be a little question: which of these traps are legal? So, which traps are legal? So you can trap A, trap B, trap C, all of them, none of them. You tell me. If you'd like to click on the relevant trap A, trap B, trap C box, that would be really good. So which one do you think, which ones are legal? Can be used, they are, have been seen, they are seen in our countryside regularly. You've got 2 spring traps, you've got a crow cage trap there as well. So of these 3 traps, which of them are legal? Okay, so when the results pop up, we'll have a little chat about those. So we've got, I should have done more of these, 63% trap A legal, trap B 86% legal, trap C 40% people think that's legal. So in fact, trap C is the illegal one. So most of you got all that right. So trap A is a fen trap, a fen style trap, a spring trap, and it's the same one as trap C. But trap A, you've got it in a box and covered with wire mesh. So that makes that legal to be used in the countryside. Now, actually, there's been a little bit of change in the legislation regarding fen traps, but essentially, you can't use them for stoats anymore. But however, that is in its wire container a legally set trap. Would have been a legally set trap. This one's sprung, it's still in its sprung position. And the top right, which is a trap B, which is a crow cage trap, as long as it's food, water, shelter, and a tag, it's legal. It's also got, if you notice, there's a small spring trap sitting next to it, which would be legal if it's used in a certain way, but I can't tell. Trap C is the illegal one. That's bad. That's a pole trap. So you're using what would be a legal device, but illegal in an illegal way on top of a pole. So that's there to attract birds of prey. Birds of prey will stand on poles. You don't need to put any bait or any dead meat on there. They will go and stand on the plate that you can see, the flat plate, and the whole thing snaps shut. similar to the image you're seeing on trap A, and it closes around the leg. And if any of you who are potential wildlife crime investigators might have noticed there's a few feathers on the side of that fen trap on the wire. So it's obviously being caught previously being caught. And this is a live investigation that was undertaken by my team during that time. So yeah, interesting. But the whole point of this is that whilst that may be illegal, and that's what I would have been concentrating on in my day job, the legal ones, you've really got to question the animal welfare justifications for using these. And going back to our 7 principles for ethical wildlife control, there has been animals have been found partially trapped in these objects and these traps. And it also, we've had this is what they're set for. These are stoats and weasels, absolutely fantastic animals. Don't see enough of them in the countryside, actually. Very rarely see them in upland areas. They're targeted by gamekeepers predominantly because they'll take young game birds, and those sorts of traps, those wire traps are used for that. Problems with fen traps, and covered in wire here, is that potentially catching other species. So this is a song thrush that's been caught in a trap. So anything that likes to move across a burn, a log across a burn, is where these things are usually placed. Hedgehog, I mean, how rare are hedgehogs getting in lots of areas now? And then the crow cage trap, which I showed you, I think these are really awful devices. And again, I've dealt with illegal use of crow cage traps before, but even the legal use of them is pretty barbaric on the species concerned. They're set to catch corvids, crows mainly. And what happens is you put a call bird, so you capture a live bird, it's probably been a pre-trapped bird, place it in the cage. And at this time of year in the spring, crows are really territorial. So if they've got a nesting pair of crows in this area, they will be attracted down to that trap because of the bird inside it, and they will try and mob that bird. And they're getting caught in they go in and they can't get out. It's a bit like a lobster pot design. And as I say, this one looks as though it's being used legally, but the stress on these birds must be extreme. They're highly intelligent. The crow family is very, very bright, and they will spend a lot of time trying to work out how to get out. Whereas some other species may be sitting around waiting to see what happens. But again, gamekeeper comes along, kills them, and so the cycle of killing seems to be never ending with these devices. And again, can be used in our countryside, sort of hidden away in a way, unless you are like some of you perhaps accessing the more remote areas of Scotland, away from the more public areas. This is all going on now as we speak, and I find it quite incredible that people still don't realise that these things are used, but also still legal. And here's 2 buzzards in a crow cage trap. I'm not going to show you any horrible videos. And these were killed by the gamekeeper, and we filmed them doing that. And that was a big ethical issue for us to do that. But we know that it happens, and people are being convicted of it. So if those birds have been released unharmed, there'd be no offence there. But again, they are often misused. Lots of evidence to show that. Again, should be no place for them in the countryside. This is an example of an illegal use of what would be a legal trap with a white pigeon. Can't use white pigeons as call birds because they can attract birds of prey, and it becomes a hawk trap. So again, a legal trap being used illegally. And this is a goshawk in a crow cage trap that was released unharmed. But yeah, even this is a legal use of a trap in our countryside. So you've got food, water, shelter. So a bit of food, which is dead. I'm not sure what that is actually. Hare, or maybe it could be hares. And yeah, it's just barbaric. But awareness is growing. There is hope here. So the grouse moor issues have been really captured by the issue of hen harriers, this rare bird of prey. And as I say, Chris Packham and lots of supporters busy now with making more noise about driven grouse moors and what's going on there. And I was really pleased to be able to get in some of the issues to do with the untold suffering, as we call it, of our wild animals, which are in the wrong place. They are not wanted by gamekeepers, and they are being, quite frankly, persecuted. So lots of awareness raising going on, which is great. We need to keep that momentum going. Nice picture of some friends. So towards last autumn, managed to get out when we were allowed to have a socially distanced trip to the Carifen Valley, which is in Dumfries and Galloway near Moffat. It's one of the, I just love the place because I used to work at the Grey Mare's Tail nearby. And I remember when these trees that Dave and his family are standing by there had just been planted. So really brilliant work where no trapping, no snaring, some real ecological restoration, chances of seeing wild animals as peregrines on the crags. It's superb. And there's a lot of this going on. So there's a lot of thought now about wilding, rewilding, a sense of the wild, putting areas back to some sort of growing ecological systems. This valley that they're standing on here used to be closely cropped by sheep, mainly grazed by sheep. So the sheep were removed, goats were taken somewhere else, and the whole valley was huge fencing around it, and then restored, and then eventually fences coming down to enable some grazing going on. So it's just a bit of a symbol to show you that these things are taking root, and this is in a whole other area away from driven grouse moors. This is more optimistic. It feels good. There are challenges though, aren't there? Because a lot of our countryside's not like that. There are the arable areas, and I just want to say quite quickly now, thank you to Laurie Campbell, the famous wildlife photographer, who's a big supporter of ours, and he's given me a load of low-res pictures to use for presentations. So the quality of the pictures are going to go up as this talk continues. This is arable farmland, much adapted by humans, and you can see evidence of cropping here and crops. So yeah, lots of stuff going on. And then we've got the high tops, the mountains, a lot of wilder areas under benign land management processes such as the National Trust for Scotland, Rspb, John Muir Trust, Scottish Wildlife Trust, lots of great reserves, and lots of thought now about how those are joined up. So you've got wildlife corridors, you don't have isolated nature reserves. And this is Glencoe. And one of the early projects I was involved in as a countryside manager for the National Trust for Scotland was a rewilding style, the Millennium Forest for Scotland projects, which was planting up these gullies and fencing off from deer browsing to enable natural restoration of woodlands. You can see the low scrub there in the bottom of the valley. Well, you would have had, like the Carifen Valley that I showed you with Dave and his family, you would have had small woodland trees merging up into scrub communities up on the sides of the hills. And it's a great vision, and it does give you the sense of purpose that we can put nature back again. We need to think about animal welfare where we do that. So you might have red squirrels, and you've got issues to do with grey squirrels, and what do you do about that? But the big issue for Scotland really is our magnificent red deer, and they are a real icon. They are on, magnificent paintings. They're the monarch of the glen. It's a cracking animal, but unfortunately, and this goes back to my main point about rewilding, again, we seem to have messed things up. So we've reduced the predator levels to almost zero. So there's no wolves, no bears, or any of those species anymore. And there's big conversations elsewhere about restoration of these environments and links, reintroductions, etc. But anyway, deer have no natural predators. They are predominantly a woodland animal, but some of them now live, well, lots of them living out on the open hillside. And they are a delight to see, but it must be, I think, the biggest land management killing operation going on anywhere. There's over 100,000 deer of the 4 species of deer we have in Scotland. Over 100,000, predominantly red deer, are killed every year under the cull to meet cull targets. And this is for various reasons. And this is to do with environmental issues, to do with reforesting. We need to get more woodland. We need to, for carbon capture. There's browsing on rare alpine plants. Some landowners previously have fed deer, predominantly for commercial stalking. But what I'm talking about here is the killing of deer by conservation organisations for the purposes of conservation. Now, you have to admit that they are going through the 7 principles. There is a, you can understand why it happens. You can probably feel that there is some sort of planning going into this. So we need to reduce the deer numbers by a certain level because of A, B, C, and D, and E. So you can sort of get a hold of that. I'm not sure there has been enough really regarding thinking about the 7 principles again, maintaining social acceptability about this. I don't think a lot of people really know about it, apart from bursts of media every now and again. I mean, we tend to get dragged in with, I bet you don't like deer being killed, do you? And it's like a Friday afternoon phone call from a journalist. Now, OneKind understands that some circumstances animals need to be killed by human beings. And what we're very keen, though, is that there are clear objectives and it's done humanely. So these animals have one bad day, as opposed to the horrible suffering that we could have in situations of, say, the farmed animal, intensive farmed animal sector. But also goats and other animals have been cut. There've been loads of news about goats over the years, about them being translocated rather than killed, etc. One of the issues of lots of deer on the hill, particularly, is that there are probably many thousands of deer die every year, every winter, due to starvation. So the carrying capacity of the land means that, so we're really hands-on. Human beings are really hands-on with red deer. It's a huge topic. And the Deer Working Group report, which was commissioned by the government, reported recently about this. And we've been going through that with a fine-tooth comb to look for the animal welfare positives in it. And there are a few. And what we want to see is greater competence of people shooting these animals. So I'm not really interested in people going sport and stalking. And what I'm interested in is the higher standards that the Forest and Land Scotland and others use when they're actually targeting deer to kill them. So yeah, lots of discussions to come on wild deer, and it's a topic that won't go away. And there will be further work and liaison and consultation that needs to be done regarding this issue. And we're going to be at the forefront of that, making sure that these objectives are clear. And there's an endpoint. What is the endpoint of all this killing anyway? And I want to see some strong animal welfare prioritisation built into any new regulations, some of which we might support. Here's an interesting one as well. So I went to Knapdale, the site of the beaver project where they were released, and I was stunned. Again, it's not my picture, it's Laurie Campbell again, and wow, to see this animal back in the countryside, where it used to be the return of the native, to see beavers is just astonishing. They're amazing at altering their environment for the better, for nature, but of course, when you're translocating an animal like this or moving it from one place to another, there's all sorts of issues you have to take into account. So the veterinary side of it, each animal is a sentient being. So each beaver has feelings. It can suffer pain, and anxiety, etc. So you need to build animal welfare in right at the beginning of these translocation projects. And as others have commentated widely on this, who's actually who is responsible for safeguarding animal welfare sometimes, which is not very clear in these projects. So build it in, but the green shoots of recovery are great. but let's just start building in a little bit more the animal welfare side of it. Where it has been done quite well, I think, is in the bird sector. So red kites, we see them in an environment now. We celebrate seeing them in areas that I never used to see them when I was a child. And that's because of translocation reintroduction projects, where welfare was brought, there was serious veterinary input. The welfare of the birds were taken into consideration. The surroundings that they were going into and the effects on other species had been well studied. So that's good. And this is the sort of extreme end where this is the tagging of golden eagles to try and find out where they're going so we can protect them in a better way. So this sort of intervention, you have to think about who's doing it. So who's tagging the birds? Do those tags lead to any suffering? And all that's been studied, and the people doing this, as you and doing this at the moment, have been trained to the maximum to make sure that the birds are not affected by these devices. And in fact, the bird I showed you lying dead in the lay-by is one of these chicks, and we would never have found that unless it had a satellite tag on it. The tags are designed to fall off, etc. And back they come, and they're back in the environment. But again, I'm just being a little bit selfish here because I like to see them, and I like to go and watch them, and I know other people do, but that's us appreciating them. We have to think about the individual species, the individual birds themselves, and make decisions regarding ethics and evidence. And it, white-tailed eagles were formerly moved from chicks, very young chicks were moved from Norway and then released into Scotland. And again, quite a big consequence for these birds at the time. And you've got to weigh up the acceptability of doing so. A big success story, but again, I wonder if animal welfare could have been built in more solidly right at the beginning. And here's a majestic white-tailed eagle on a fox. You gamekeepers should see that picture. Mountain hares, I can't leave you without just quickly mentioning mountain hares. Bit of a success story that we've got them finally protected in Scotland. Thank goodness for that. So one of the first things I noticed on the shelf in our office in Edinburgh when I walked in my first day was this sticker, and I really liked it. And I do remember the campaigns, and some of you were involved with those. And thank you if you were. Basically pushing a point that mass culls of this delightful and fantastic animal should not be happening. And here's the contrast again. So 1 minute you got photographers taking beautiful pictures of hares, the mountain hares in Scotland, and being shown on Spring Watch, Autumn Watch and Winter Watch, and millions of people tuning in, but nobody really taking into consideration that there's mass culls going on our upland areas by gamekeepers. And here's a particularly brutal picture from the back in the day. Hopefully we'll never have to see this again. And again, you all stepped up to do that and made an effort. And it's easier to do that with an iconic animal like a mountain hare, but it's less easy to do that with animals that people don't really click with and respond to. Again, the evidence, again, the 7 principles of ethical wildlife control, you run through those and think, put the mountain hare lens through this, and very little evidence that these culls were doing anything at all. Some of the suggestions from gamekeepers that they were transferring disease, mountain hare was transferring disease from the hare to the grouse, was not founded. There was really no social interaction from anyone, from any of us about it until it was revealed as an issue by League Against Cruel Sports, Chris Packham, OneKind, and everybody else. There was no planning or long-term monitoring. We didn't even really know how many hares there were. There was various studies done, but it was quite confusing. And making decisions based on specifics, not labels. So on one hand, an animal might be seen as vermin, and that term is used quite regularly. So foxes will be described as vermin by gamekeepers, but I would call them part of our wildlife and natural history in my home area. So yeah, mountain hares is a real issue. If you want to know more about all this and listen to people far more qualified than me to talk about specific safeguarding wild animals, how we value wild animals, and how we evaluate wild animal welfare from really some top people, please do consider joining the Wild Animal Welfare Conference, Monday 19th of April online. And I think we're going to pop into the chat the link to book on that. I really recommend it. The last one we were able to do, OneKind's a big supporter of the Wild Animal Welfare Committee. We were able to do in Edinburgh, and it was such an inspiring a day to think about these issues to do with the 7 principles, the 5 domains, and sentience of animals, wild animals. And it's an area that is going to grow, I think, in interest and as we move forward. And with Scotland now having a Wild Animal Commission, it's good news that we're going to have some input to the next Scottish Parliament from real wild animal welfare experts such as vets and practitioners. So yeah, I hope one day we'll get back to this again. This is something we were quite good at, and we'll go back to fox hunting issues and on a sunny day outside Holyrood. But for now, I'm sure there'll be some questions. Thank you very much for listening, and hope you found it interesting. Thank you.